I want to bring up some mysteries about words. Now, the first question might be, well, what exactly is a word? Now, I'm talking about words because I'm really interested in concepts, but a word is like a unit of conception. So I'll focus on words and we'll broaden out to concepts. And the reason I want to talk to you about concepts is because I want to talk to you about ideological and group identification, and such identification is based in part on shared behavior, but also in part on shared conceptions. And the reason that I'm interested in group identity is because I'm interested in what it is that motivates people to retain their group identity, and also to defend their group identity or expand it, often at the cost of warfare. And then finally, because I'm interested in why people will do horrific things to one another in order, hypothetically, to facilitate that process. So that's the linkage. So let's think about words for a minute. And so the first question you might ask is, well, what is a word? And St. Augustine, from what I understand, formally posited that a word was a label for a thing. And I would say that that's mostly what people think when they think about words, which they don't do very often. They use them, but they don't think about them. So a word could be a label for a thing. All right. Now, that's a funny concept, because the thing is often defined by words, and so there's a bit of circularity in there, right? Because for that argument to be exactly true, the thing would have to be self-evident, sort of independent of any verbal formalization, and then you could just slap a label on it. And it's pretty clear that our conceptual abilities also influence the manner in which we perceive things, so there's a reciprocal interplay. So, okay, so anyways, that's one definition, and you can see that it has some utility. So here's another definition. This is from Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein said, a word is like a player in a chess game, one of the pieces. And what he meant by that in part was that you're engaged in an activity when you're using language, and the activity has a vaguely game-like structure, and the reason that you're using words is to move ahead in the game. You're a player in the game. And so then you can think about, well, so that's another analogy, that a word has got a tool-like structure, and you use it to attain certain ends and to operate in the world. And so that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. And then I was thinking about, this is a more visual analogy. And so imagine that you have a toy train, and there's freight cars on it, and you fill the freight cars with all sorts of different things. Maybe one is full of screws and Legos, and another one is full of erasers and coins and so on. And there's a little tunnel so that the train track goes underneath it, and then the train is continually running underneath it, and that thing stays in the same place. And that's like a word too. Now that's a trickier thing, because a word encompasses things that are the same and things that are different, right? It has to, because everything that you try to categorize as an entity isn't homogeneous. It's not homogeneous. Its internal structure varies. So, and that means that insofar as you're treating it as if it's only one entity, it might do things that will surprise you. You know, so it's especially true with complex things. So you might say, well, this is my wife. Okay, and that there's a certain set of assumptions that go along with that label. And as long as those assumptions are met, which basically means that as long as the relationship you have with that person stays within that definitional box, then you can use the term and you can get somewhere with it. But because people are full of snakes, you never know when they're going to jump out of the category that you've put them in and manifest something that's completely unlike the word that you've been using to describe them. And many things are full of snakes. Or you could say, to some degree, everything is full of snakes. And that's why it's useful to think of a word as a place where multiple things move through. So another example that you might think about is, say, a stock. Because the stock market's kind of a good model of the environment as such. You know, a stock is like a thing, so you can think of it like a thing, and people do think of it like a thing. But the problem is that the stock itself is an absolutely dynamic entity, and what it contains at any given moment is far beyond your capacity to comprehend, because you think about how a company is operating in the economic and then the biological environment. I mean, it's subject to any number of factors. So for example, you know, maybe it's a coffee company stock and then there's some weird blight in one of the coffee growing countries because, I don't know, maybe because people have been using water improperly, and so then the coffee dies and the crop's bad and then the price goes up. It's like that the stock as an entity in some sense contains the whole world, and you can treat it like it's one thing for certain operations, but most of the time that's really going to trip you up. It's going to trip you up in a serious way. So